very much, and thanks everybody for being here tonight. Does this work this slide?
Yeah. It should.
There we go. Yes. Yeah, I know. So thanks everyone for coming out tonight, and thanks to Jen for inviting me, and glad to be here to talk about one of my favorite topics, sleep. So a lot of what I'm going to be talking about is insomnia, which is the sleep problem that probably comes to most people's mind when we talk about sleep problems. And what is insomnia? Well, it can be a number of things. It can be one or more of the things that are shown on this slide. So it can be either trouble falling asleep, or maybe you fall asleep but you can't stay asleep and you wake up either very frequently, or you wake up too early in the morning and you can't get back to sleep. Or maybe you're sleeping through the night and yet when you wake up in the morning you don't feel rested. So any of those things or any combination of them can be what we call insomnia. And this is quite a common problem for everybody, as we know, and maybe even a little bit more common for people with HIV. Now, insomnia can either be acute, which means it's a very short-term problem, maybe happens when you're really stressed, you're worried about something, whatever it may be, some sort of stressful situation or whatever that triggers it. Or it can be triggered by changes in your schedule, so jet lag, time zone changes, shift work, that kind of thing. The thing is that if you don't get on top of it right away, even these sort of short-term problems can turn into a long-term pattern. So the stressor may be taken away, that may not exist anymore, and yet the pattern of insomnia is sort of fixed and you're stuck with it. So it's really important to deal with it, as soon as you can before it becomes chronic. And chronic insomnia is a sleeping problem that persists over the longer term. It may not be every night, it may be intermittent, but it's enough that it disrupts your sleep and it bothers you. Now, medically speaking, or in terms of quality of life, what does this mean? What does this do to people? Well, if you have chronic insomnia over a long period of time, it reduces your ability to pay attention to things and to concentrate during the day. And often, for example, this can lead to being more accident prone. And it also causes poor memory sometimes. So this HIV-associated neurocognitive dysfunction that we've been talking about so much, a lot of that, the symptoms may be very similar to what's seen in someone who has chronic insomnia. I'm sure you well know if you've had a few nights where you don't sleep well, you can be really irritable, and if it goes on for a long time, it can even lead to depression. And of course, it leads to being tired and lacking energy during the day. There is sort of a distinction between tiredness and sleepiness. Sleepiness means a tendency to fall asleep at inappropriate times, and sometimes that can be a sign of a sleep disorder rather than just regular insomnia. So there are sleep disorders aside from insomnia, which is what I'm focusing on, but there's a number of specific sleep disorders. So these are disorders of the nervous system and the sleep-wake cycle that cause very specific problems. For example, narcolepsy, many of you have probably heard about. This is where people fall asleep, with the drop of a hat at dinner or whatever. Restless leg syndrome is a fairly common problem, especially as people get older, where just as they're falling asleep, they get a sensation in their legs or sometimes their arms that they just can't get comfortable, and they're moving around, and that can be very disruptive to sleep. Tends to run in families as well. And you may have also heard about sleep apnea, which is a fairly common problem. Obstructive sleep apnea is where there's a blockage in the airways, so you gasp, or sometimes you snore really loudly because your breathing is interrupted while you're sleeping. And this can actually be medically quite a serious problem if it occurs. And these sort of things, actual sleep disorders, are often managed through specialized sleep clinics where they have a multidisciplinary team which is, specializes in these kind of problems. And there's a number of them in the Lower Mainland. I just listed them here for your information. There's one out at UBC, for example. And you would need referral from your physician if you want to be seen at one of those places. But those are sort of a separate issue from just regular insomnia. Important to remember that insomnia per se is not a disease, it's a symptom, and there's many possible things that can cause it, and obviously there may be more than one thing working in a person at any given time. So what are the causes of insomnia? Well, first of all, there's some medical conditions that can cause insomnia. For example, thyroid disease. If you're hyperthyroid, that can give you problems sleeping. High blood pressure. If you have breathing problems such as asthma, or you're coughing and not breathing well at night, obviously that can interrupt your sleep. Symptoms that occur at night, like diarrhea, heartburn, that kind of thing, might keep you up. Or if you have to get up to pee all the time, or fever, night sweats can really disrupt sleep. Or pain, of course, is a very common cause of insomnia. And aside from medical conditions, there's also psychiatric or mental conditions that can lead to insomnia. So depression, insomnia is a very common presenting symptom, in fact, of someone who has depression. And it can also be related to anxiety or mania. So insomnia can be a common symptom when you have those kind of problems. And if you think about it, obviously, you sometimes get into a real cycle, because if you're depressed, you don't sleep well, and you don't sleep well, it makes you more depressed, and on and on it goes. Or the same thing with pain. If you're not sleeping well because of pain, you're not able to tolerate the pain, and it makes the pain worse, and so you get into this vicious cycle. And sometimes treating the insomnia itself can help with the depression or help with the pain, because what your body really is asking for is to get more sleep. Other causes of insomnia, of course, include substances. So anything that stimulates the nervous system, and that includes things like alcohol, nicotine, a number of illicit drugs, of course, some prescription drugs, which I'll talk about a little bit, as well as over-the-counter medications, which I'll also tell you a little bit about, because you may not be aware of them. And caffeine, of course, everybody knows that caffeine is a stimulant, and it's likely to keep you awake, especially if you have it later in the day. But there's some places where caffeine is that you may not have thought of. So any of these can even compound your insomnia more. So what are some of the prescription medications that can cause insomnia? A lot of them can. I just put some examples here just for you to think about. Some antidepressants can cause insomnia, some asthma medications, and certain medications that are used for heart disease and high blood pressure. Champix, the stop smoking thing, can certainly cause insomnia. And diuretics, which are water pills, especially if they're taken in the evening, and then you have to get up to go to the bathroom at night. Some antibiotics can cause insomnia as a side effect, and some antifungals you may get for thrush or whatever. Steroids and also interferon that's used for Hep C treatment commonly causes insomnia. So those are just some examples of prescription medications that if you're taking them, they may make matters worse. What about antiretrovirals? Well, the antiretroviral that is most commonly associated with insomnia is efavirenz, which is the brand name, of course, is Stephen. It's in Atripla, the one pill once daily regimen. Sometimes it's associated with abnormal dreams, but it can just cause insomnia without the dreams. It varies a lot. And as you know, they say that this it often is an early symptom, but sometimes it persists as well. So you can have insomnia when you start taking this drug, and maybe after 6 or 8 weeks on it, it'll get better, but maybe it won't. Maybe you'll be stuck with that sort of symptom. And if that's the case, sometimes there are alternatives that your doctor could switch you to instead of the efavirenz. Certainly that's the antiviral that most commonly is causing insomnia. I put this down just out of interest. I don't know if you've heard of dolutegravir, but it's still an investigational drug, but probably will be available next year, let's say. And it's in the same class of drugs as raltegravir, so it's an integrase inhibitor. And in some of the studies with it, it actually caused more insomnia than efavirenz, so that's something that we'll need to keep an eye on. Most other antivirals are not known to be associated with insomnia, but efavirenz is probably the big culprit. Now, over-the-counter meds, things that you may be taking on your own that you may not have even thought about. And a big one is decongestants, as in sort of cold remedies, particularly if they contain ephedrine or pseudoephedrine. These are the decongestants. They're related to methamphetamine, so they're stimulants. And if you take above the recommended dose, or if you take them late in the day, then those certainly can, make you hyper and keep you awake. So check the label on what you're taking for those particular things. The other thing that you may not be aware of, a lot of people don't know, is that a lot of pain relievers combinations contain caffeine. So some headache remedies and cold remedies, especially if they sort of advertise rapid relief, they often will have caffeine in them. And you know why? What's the reason for that? The reason is because if the drug contains either acetaminophen, which is Tylenol, or ASA, which is aspirin, the caffeine actually makes that painkiller be absorbed more quickly, so it gets into the system more quickly, and that's why they put caffeine in there. But sometimes it can be a considerable amount of caffeine. So in things like Tylenol #1, acetaminophen with codeine, and some cold remedies, and again, the things that are advertised for headache, they often will have caffeine, so be sure that you read the label. And sometimes some prescription medications, some prescription painkillers will contain caffeine as well, so be aware of that and keep an eye out for that. Just for sort of reference, I made this chart of the caffeine contents of some foods and other things. So a cup of coffee, average caffeine content is about 120 to 180 milligrams. A cup of tea, this would be black tea, is 40 to 50. Obviously, it depends on the kind of tea and how strong it is, that sort of thing. And these are just kind of ballparky numbers. A cola, a can of Coke is somewhere around 30 to 50, unless it's Jolt, in which case I'm sure it's a lot more. Energy drinks like Red Bull, Rockstar, etc. have about 70 to 80 milligrams. Some of them are a lot higher than that, in fact. So again, probably a good idea to read the label. Chocolate milk, not too bad. Chocolate has some, this is the amount for milk chocolate as opposed to dark chocolate, which probably contains more. But just to give you an idea, a cold or headache remedy where you take 2 pills can contain about the same amount as a cup of coffee. So, it's not a trivial amount of caffeine that's in there. So I happen to be on the website, and Health Canada says that adults shouldn't consume more than 400 milligrams of caffeine a day, but to me that actually sounded like quite a bit. And obviously if you have trouble sleeping, you should take as little caffeine as possible, and especially not late in the day. But it just sort of gives you an idea of the comparative amounts in some different foods or drinks. So, what you can do, don't be her. Isn't that a scary picture? Don't be her. So if you're not sleeping well, you can start by, looking at the low-hanging fruit, as they say, and see if there's something obvious that you're doing that you would be able to change. Like if you're taking these cold medicines or something containing caffeine, drinking a Jolt 10 minutes before you go to bed, that sort of thing. Is there something really obvious that you could be doing to help with your sleep patterns? And then there's a lot of things in terms of general sleep habits that people can pay attention to. And I'm sorry, this is kind of a busy slide, but they kind of put 10 sleep habits all together on here. So one of them is to wind down before you go to bed. Don't sort of go right from being very active and then expect your body to be able to settle right down and go to sleep. Have a relaxation period beforehand to separate yourself from the problems. Bedrooms should be used for sex and sleep. In that order, yeah, maybe. But nothing else. As we say, don't work there, don't, write your thesis there, whatever. Keep it limited to sex and sleep. Maybe not at the same time. Your bed and your bedroom should be comfortable, so quiet and dark and good temperature, and I think David will be talking about that, specifics of that a little more in a moment. Keeping a regular schedule is really critical. Getting up and going to bed at about the same time each day, not sleeping until noon on weekends. If you do take naps, preferably don't take naps, but if you do, again, make them part of your regular schedule. Exercise is really important to have some physical activity in your daily routine in order for you to sleep well at night, but don't exercise right before you go to bed. So at least within an hour or two, you shouldn't be doing any strenuous exercise because that's obviously going to stimulate you. Watching your caffeine intake, I already talked about that. for sure, no caffeine after about 2 in the afternoon. People's susceptibility or their sensitivity to caffeine really varies. Like some people are a lot more sensitive than others. So, some people can have a cup of tea and go right to bed with no problem, and then, others, if they have any caffeine at all, they can't sleep. So you have to sort of play it by ear with that one and figure out what your particular sensitivity to caffeine is. Smoking, also, people may not think of that as being stimulating, but the nicotine is a stimulant, so don't smoke right before you go to bed. And alcohol isn't a good sedative. It may make you drowsy, but it disrupts your normal sleep patterns. So alcohol or street drugs to help you sleep, not a good plan. In terms of food, if you eat a big meal, a heavy meal right before you go to bed, it's not going to help your sleep at all. So if you're hungry, have something very light or milk or something like that, not something heavy close to bedtime. And I like this last one, above all, don't try too hard. Yeah, right. But what they're sort of saying is, if you're in bed and you're trying to sleep, don't just lie there and get all frustrated and mad at yourself, because that's not going to make you rested at all. What you should do is get up and go do something relaxing, and then get back to bed when you're feeling sleepy. It's better for you to get up and do something quiet. That's more restful than lying in bed, sort of gnashing your teeth and looking at the clock because you can't sleep. And when you get up to do something, read a book or something. Don't try to avoid screens. Don't watch TV. Don't, go on Facebook or the computer. And again, I think this is something David will be talking about a little more, but the light from computer screens is actually really stimulating to the brain. And, stay away from that. TV and computers, that sort of thing, if you're not sleeping at night. Read a book. Do a crossword puzzle. Do a Sudoku. So if you're not sleeping well, if you have insomnia, what should you do? Well, after you've kind of looked at, some of these things and you can't sort out what the problem may be, talk to your doctor. Don't count on your doctor to ask how you're sleeping. They probably won't. They might, but they can't read your mind, so don't count on it. Let your doctor know what the problem is, and be prepared to sort of give them some details about whether it's a problem falling asleep, whether you're getting up a lot at night, whether pain is an issue, whatever. They're going to want some details about this. But your doctor can help by, for example, looking into some of those other causes I talked about. So, they can do a physical exam, they can check your thyroid to see if there's a thyroid problem, they can check your blood pressure, etc. So they can rule out any sort of medical basis for your insomnia. Depending on how experienced or interested in your doctor is in, sleep problems, they may be able to institute some treatment themselves, like cognitive behavioral therapy, or they may refer you to someone for various different kinds of therapy. So it depends on the individual physician. I was telling David when we were talking the other day that at least back in the dark ages when I went to medical school, there wasn't a lot of, we didn't talk about insomnia and sleep disorders in medical school. We weren't really taught about that. So, don't necessarily expect that your doctor is going to be an expert on this. But on the other hand, they can certainly, as I said, rule out a medical problem underlying it and make an appropriate referral. In some cases, sleeping pills will be used and will be prescribed to you. In the vast majority of cases, it's recommended that those only be given for a few days. So for an acute thing, if you're under, a stress or whatever, that they're only used for maybe 7 to 10 days and not as a crutch for sort of chronic insomnia type of situations. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the different kinds of medications in a minute, but in terms of physicians, I also wanted to mention that one of the HIV medication companies actually has BMS specifically has a program on sleep disorders in HIV, and maybe in the future, if your doctor is taking that program, they'll be fairly knowledgeable and will be able to help you out on that. So it's a little plug for that program. So what are some of the medications used to treat insomnia? Well, there's some over-the-counter things that you may have seen or heard about, Sominex and whatever. Most of the time those are antihistamines, so they're like Benadryl, the things that are used for allergies. They don't really work that well. They will make you drowsy, but they cause some side effects the next day, like dry mouth and blurred vision and such. Also, if you take them for more than a couple of days, they're not going to keep working. So, you know, they may work for one day, but certainly for a long-term problem, they're not going to be great. The sort of classic sleeping pills, I put a few names here just because they might be familiar to you. Most of them are benzodiazepines, which means they're related to Valium. They're in that same family of medications. And for the most part, they work very well. However, they can cause sleepiness during the day and you know, sort of memory problems and confusion and things during the day, particularly if they're long-acting or particularly in older people. They can cause problems. They also can cause rebound insomnia. In other words, when you stop taking them, then your insomnia gets even worse. And again, you build up tolerance, and they can be habit-forming if you use them over a long term. So they're okay for the short term in small doses, but for sure not for long term. Some of the newer prescription sleeping pills are called the Z drugs, or Z drugs, or if you're in the US. So that's zopiclone, which is in a vein. You might be familiar with zolpidem, which is Sublinox. It's given as a sublingual pill. And these are a sort of improvement on the older benzodiazepine sleeping medications in that they're cleared from the body more quickly, so you tend not to get that drowsiness the next morning. They have less side effects. They're less habit-forming, but that's not to say that they're not habit-forming at all. For sure, you can get psychological dependence where you're like, oh, I can't sleep if I don't take this stuff. So it's not to say they aren't habit-forming at all, and they still shouldn't be used for more than, you know, a week or two at a time. But they are overall an improvement over some of the older medications. Melatonin is something that a lot of people are interested in terms of something you can get at the health food store, and for sure it's safe, and it works reasonably well for things like jet lag and for shift work, so for very sort of short-term problems. There's apparently a long-acting formulation which works quite well, and studies have shown that it's pretty effective, but as far as I know, it's not available in Canada as of yet. It's only available in the US. So melatonin is okay. There's a couple of other things. L-tryptophan, which some people take for sleep, hasn't been shown to be effective, although it hasn't really been intensively studied. And valerian is sort of similar in some ways to the benzodiazepine, so it can cause some similar problems, and again, hasn't been really well studied. So what about sleeping pills if you're taking antiretrovirals? Obviously, you know, there might be some concern if there's some interaction there. Well, antiretrovirals can either increase or decrease the level of your sleeping pill, whether it's one of the older kind or one of the newer Z drugs, depending on, you know, which antivirals you're taking. It can go either way. So therefore, you might need a lower dose of the sleeping pill because it may be more sedating, and it may make you still tired the next day, et cetera, et cetera. So before your doctor prescribes a sleeping pill, you should check that out, have them check it, or talk to the pharmacist about it, because these drug interactions are fairly well described, and so they should be aware of that. I'm not aware of any interactions going the other way in terms of the sleeping pill affecting the level of the antivirals, so I don't think there's any evidence that sleeping pills can reduce the effectiveness of your antivirals, but for sure you may need the dose adjusted of the sleeping pill itself. So, another cute picture. The most important thing you can do, as I said, is, you know, don't rely on those medications, but develop some good sleeping habits. And again, David, I think, is going to talk about this in a little more detail, but this group that was studying this, and it was actually in a group of HIV positive women, they came up with this thing, and they call it sleeping better, B-E-T-T-E-R. So B stands for bedroom, you know, again, the environment that you sleep in, think about that. E for exercise, so the importance of activity, but not too close to sleep, makes a lot of sense. Tension, reducing tension, by, you know, things like meditation and yoga and that sort of thing, excellent thing to do. Also, to keep your mind from sort of spinning about everything you have to do the next day, make a list, you know, before you go to bed, make a list, and then you can forget about it. Time of sleep is another important issue. You know, not everybody needs 8 hours of sleep. Need for sleep is really variable. Some people get by totally fine on 4 or 5 hours. Some people need 9 hours. You know, it totally varies. So, you know, everybody's not the same. It tends to get, you tend to need less sleep as you get older. That's not always the case, but sometimes that's the case. But maybe you're waking up early in the morning because you've had enough sleep. It's not because you're depressed or because you have insomnia. Maybe your body is rested. So remember that your sleep requirements can change over your lifetime. So, you know, that's an important thing. Remember things like eating, drinking, caffeine, smoking, etc. Before you go to bed, and even in the afternoon and evening, how all those things can affect your sleep pattern. And really important to remember your body's rhythm and keep a consistent schedule, and avoid late at night, but have the proper kind of light during the day, which can be challenging if you live in Vancouver, but I think David will help us understand how that can be done. And after you hear him talk, you'll be sleeping like one of these. We want to do questions now.
I just want to say that I don't get tired anymore. I go from being tired, I go right into fatigue. Where, you know, where my body is just so tired, and then I can't sleep because my body is just so fatigued.
Oh, I know what you mean, yeah.
So, I mean, is there some way to, like, I don't get sleepy or I don't nod off?
You're just like exhausted.
I'm just exhausted.
That's an interesting thing. For sure, I would want to make sure that there isn't something physical going on that's causing that if you're that exhausted. And also, let's take up that question with this guy and see what he has to say about it. But great question, I know what you mean. Yes?
What about marijuana? Does that help?
Do you have an opinion on that, marijuana?
It's like a lot of other I guess, sleep aids. What it actually does is it actually prevents you from getting to the lower stages of REM. Yeah. So a lot of the time it's a very quick sedative. So what it'll do, it'll knock you out, but it prevents you from getting down to the deep stages of sleep where you actually your body starts to repair itself and do what it's supposed to do in the middle of the night. So like alcohol, like a lot of other stimulants, or I guess sedatives, so to speak, it will knock you out, but it prevents you from getting that deep sleep.
The quality of sleep.
Yeah, quality of sleep. Nicotine's the same way.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, just restlessness during morning sleep. I mean, I slept for like 9 hours last night, but still, I mean, I was just restless, like tossing, turning, what after that? Stress related?
You know what? I just talked about 100 different things that can cause insomnia, and I'm not belittling that. I mean, it may be a combination of a lot of different things. So that it really needs to be looked into, to look at, what you're taking in during the day, what your sleep environment is like, whether there's any medications or any medical issues that are going on. It's not something that has a simple answer. Let's put it that way. Lots of things can do that. But yeah, and it's frustrating, eh? It's really frustrating because you fall asleep and then you're awake. And like, why am I awake? Yeah, that's frustrating. I sympathize totally. Yes?
I was told that magnesium, like a magnesium supplement.
Magnesium.
Supplement or
That's interesting. I know magnesium is good for like muscles and muscle cramps and stuff, if that's an issue, but I don't know about sleep specifically. Do you have an opinion about magnesium?
The two best supplements you can get for sleep is magnesium and calcium.
Okay.
Those are the two best ones. I mean, just obviously follow the directions on the package, on the bottle, but magnesium and calcium are really, really solid at helping.
So that will help.
It will help, yeah.
So we'll take it.
The one thing I always recommend as well is that if you're doing you're adding any sort of medication or supplements to your routine, always talk to your doctor first, because what you might not realize is that there could be, I call it cross-mogenation, where you get medications that are interacting with each other, even though it might seem innate or inanimate, that it still can get that interaction, so be careful with that.
Also, in terms of calcium supplements, be careful if you're taking Atazanavir, and don't take your calcium supplement at the same time as Atazanavir, because it won't be absorbed properly, so you want to space those apart. It's like an antacid, basically, so keep that in mind. So since I deferred all these questions to this guy, why don't we let him talk and we can have more questions at the end. Yes, one last burning question, sir.
When I was younger, I spent a lot of time in the bedroom, and now it's mostly in the kitchen. I'm wondering if should I get the mirrors on the bedroom ceiling reinstalled in the kitchen?
Depends what you're looking at.
Thank you, Marianne. Speaker, published author, and a sleep innovator from Vancouver, BC. After his personal struggle with sleep that lasted for 20 years, he created the organization SleepStudent to share cutting-edge sleep information and strategies with others to help them get the rest they deserve. Through workshops and seminars, he is using his speaking ability to share his evidence and specialized knowledge with the world. Welcome, David.
I want to take this opportunity to say, can you hear me in the back? Yes, okay. The other thing I want to say is thank you so much for Positive Living BC for having me come out, especially for Jen for the invitation to be able to come and have the opportunity to speak with you, and also the opportunity to meet Marianne, even though it's been brief, it's been 3 days, a whole 3 days since we met. And if you hadn't noticed, we actually called each other before coming out to see how we were going to dress, and apparently this was completely coincidental. It's pretty creepy. And it's actually the same color, and I don't know. And then notice a better night's sleep. Look at that, just like it was meant to be. It's been a really tough 20 years, and for me, I guess Marianne's presentation was coming from a standpoint of the practitioner, the healthcare provider, the doctor, and it's kind of a nice duality, or a way to kind of contrast the two. Now looking at how things are from a patient standpoint, which is kind of a nice view, I guess. The way it started out for me was that I struggled with my sleep for the last 20 years, and it's been something that has not been an enjoyable journey, needless to say. I resonated with a lot of what Marianne was saying, and it was funny just to kind of look through all the information as to what I've been through over the years. I was pretty much started my sleep issues when I was about probably right around the 10 mark, so it was actually up until 2 years ago I finally got this. So if any of you math whizzes out there calculating my age, then I'm 32. And I kind of went through the whole routine of going through doctors, going through to see specialists. I saw more people, more professionals than I care to see in a lifetime. And anybody from nutritionists to psychologists to physiotherapists to acupuncturists to, just take your pick of practitioner who could in fact help me with this issue. I went through numerous rounds of blood tests, and unfortunately it didn't turn up anything. A lot of people start thinking, and I'm sure most of you have heard this, or some of you may have heard this, where people will start telling you that it's in your head. Well, duh, of course it's in your head. This is where a lot of it's originating from, is that you're struggling to get to sleep. It starts to play on your psyche. You start to get depressed. You start to get frustrated, and it just makes your daily life, very, very difficult. And of course, it's going to be in that realm. I went through University of Calgary sleep study. I noticed that UBC was on there, which is one of the foremost sleep study centers in Canada. And it was really an interesting experience, because after all that, after going through having sleep apnea tests, going to an ear, nose, and throat specialist, and then also having the sleep study, it turned up nothing. And that was the absolute most just heart-wrenching moment of this whole journey for me, was because I thought this was going to be the answer. And it was at that point they said, you're okay, well you're sleeping okay, you've got excessive daytime drowsiness, so here's some pills. And it was at that point that the frustration, and actually it became more of an anger than anything, because I knew there had to be a way to do this, and it had to be done in a way that, like Marianne said, is that it became personal accountability. Because I was relying too heavily on doctors to find that fix for me. At the end of the day, it becomes down to personal accountability and taking ownership of your situation, doing everything you can to rectify it. Your doctor, in a lot of cases, is a sounding board for what you're doing. And one of my care providers said the most interesting thing that stuck with me for years is that you're in my office for 15 minutes out of a day. You're in your own skin for the other 23 3/4. You are your own best caregiver. Doctors have, I think what's happened I put them on an extreme, like I guess the word is like a pedestal, that they're going to fix everything for me. And I think is that they're wonderful at what they do. They provide valuable information. They're good for providing you with, like I said, a sounding board, and that's what needs to happen, is taking that personal accountability. Okay? And so that's where I've been the last 20 years. It hasn't been a whole lot of fun, but I'll tell you what, it's given me the opportunity to get up in front of a group like this and be able to help people who I know are struggling with sleep at this point. Now, just a quick show of hands, who would say they're good sleepers? They're okay sleepers. Okay? Now, who would consider themselves a really poor sleeper? Okay? And show of hands, who struggles to just get through the day? Yeah, that's about right. One of the things that when I was watching Marianne's presentation, she was talking about sleeplessness and being able to fall asleep in inappropriate situations. So I figured it'd take 10 seconds just to go over a few places where I've fallen asleep. I've fallen asleep behind the wheel of my car, movie theaters. I've fallen asleep in drive-thrus. I've fallen asleep, had my oil changed, not figuratively, I mean actually pulling the oil out of my car. Just want to make sure that's clear. I've also, when I was in the military for a couple of years, I actually fell asleep during hand grenade training. I don't know about you, but that's probably a class you want to stay away from. And just recently, and this was just less than a year ago, I was fired from a valet position because I was crashing vehicles. And the reason why is because it was the first time in my life, and I took this on as a challenge, was to do shift work. It was the worst experience of my life. I couldn't function during the day. I was going to bed at 3 o'clock in the morning, and I was accident prone. And it wasn't that it's not that I wasn't trying. My brain was just not functioning at that point. So it's things like this you have to realize that it does have an impact on your life. I had issues with social obligations. I couldn't hold down a job. Just proved it. On top of that, I got to a point where I did hit a point of suicidal depression at one point. And it was at that point where it was a really awful situation. And when you are that tired, it just got to a point where I kind of gone, you know what, I give up, because this, just to have a state of non-existence would just have been fantastic. But I persevered, and here I am. So I want to take the opportunity to share the information, the most important information that I came across when I was doing my travels. Now, one of the first things that I want to talk about, has anybody heard the term circadian rhythm before? Show of hands, anybody heard the term? Okay. What we're going to do is just take a quick second here just to simplify this and give you an idea of quickly what it means so that it builds on everything else we're talking about. Okay, circadian rhythm is simply Latin for circa, which means about, or DM, which is day. So the easiest way to describe this is around a day. Easiest way to remember that. So in future, when you think of circadian rhythm, it's not some fancy word. All it means is it's about a day. And what that term means is it's what happens throughout the day where your body's biological processes take place. What ends up happening is that throughout various parts of the day, your body is controlling different functions. The temperature is being controlled, what time to eat, what time to use the washroom, what time to go to sleep, what time hormones are produced, what time everything's shut off, what time stuff is brought on. And it's in that 24-hour period where, with flawless magical precision, we have the ability to function as human beings and go through that cycle. Now, the cycle that we're going to focus on right here is actually going to be focusing on between 9 p.m. and 6 a.m. And that's the time when what we're going to talk about, like Marianne had mentioned about melatonin, as well as how the light and dark cycles of the planet have a huge influence on the way that we sleep, as well as we go living out our day-to-day life. Now, one of the things to keep in mind, or one of the things a lot of people don't realize, is that our entire circadian rhythm is controlled by the light and dark cycles of the planet. In the past, easiest way to describe it is you look at 100 years ago, before the advent of the light bulb, we used to get up with the sun. We used to get up with the sun, go to bed with the moon. That's just the way it happened. And if you notice, some of the healthiest people were farmers. They lived in rural areas. They were able to sleep in complete darkness, and they were able to get up with sunlight and not worry about all of the ins and outs of daily life. And that's one of the things that Marianne mentioned back in her, like she said, back in the years ago when she was doing her degree or getting through medical school. the advent of everything else that's come about in the last little while with, like she mentioned, with laptops, iPods, iPads, everything, all this technology and distractions and 24-hour day and fluorescent lights, what's happened is it's got to a point where our internal mechanisms have just become so screwed up we just don't know what time of day or year it is. And it's that circadian rhythm and that communication between the light signals as well as our environmental cues that tell us the time of day, and it tells us also the time of year, which determines a lot of how our hormones are produced and which hormones are produced. Now, the interesting thing is that these signals are so strong that it's almost like you're like a human GPS. Who here has actually been jet lagged before? Okay? The reason why you become jet lagged is because in a very short period of time, you have moved substantial distance across the planet, and now your body's playing a game of Where's Waldo. That's all that's happening. It knows you're on the planet somewhere, and it's able to find you, and that's why it takes time for that adjustment to take place, because now you have to then recalibrate your body to the different time signals that are coming from your new place, as well as the different environmental signals as well. So that's where the light and dark cycles really influence what we do. Now the question then is that how does this affect our daily life? Well, one of the things that I'm going to quickly show you here, see how good of a drawer I am. Okay. Does anybody know what that is? Please tell me somebody knows what it is. It's a bat. Okay. Say it again?
Nocturnal.
Thank you. Okay. Melatonin is referred to as the Dracula hormone. Okay? Think of Dracula. Dracula comes out at night. Dracula thrives in darkness. And it's the same way that we function in our day-to-day life. When we get to sleep, that's when the production of melatonin starts. Now, melatonin for most people, when it comes to mind, is what? What's the first thing that comes to mind to shout out if you think about it? What is melatonin?
Skin color.
Skin color, okay?
Tanning.
Tanning, okay? Melatonin. Supplement, okay. For most people, that's what comes up as the word. They think of over-the-counter, they think of supplementation. But what most people don't realize is that the melatonin is a very powerful antioxidant. It also helps control your immune function, and this is where this is probably the most crucial part of this, is that because it controls your immune function, as somebody who is already dealing with or having struggles with keeping their immune function healthy, this is where it's even more important to get to sleep. Because during the night, as the melatonin production ramps up, combine that with prolactin, it actually helps regulate your immune function. It also helps to determine your food choices, as well as it helps to increase the productivity, the activity of white blood cells. And this is where it becomes even more important. So it's more than just an over-the-counter medication that you can get. It's the life support system of your body and has more functions than I need to go over this evening. However, those are the key parts that you need to know how they function. Now, most people don't go, okay, well that's cool, I understand melatonin, but how is it produced? The easiest way to describe this is a gland inside in the middle of your brain called the pineal gland. And that gland is where melatonin is produced. That gland is responsible for the production, and the way it works is that in the presence of light, melatonin is shut off. The production shut off. So if you think about it, if you get up in the morning and the sun's coming through the curtains and that sun starts to come into your bedroom and you start to wake up naturally, as the light starts to increase, melatonin production shuts off and you wake up. Okay? In the evening time, right around 9 o'clock, when you start to actually then get closer to bedtime, because as the darkness sets in, that melatonin production kicks in. And it's that ebb and flow that controls our entire ability to get to sleep and stay asleep. So one of the things I'm going to talk about towards the end is actually getting through and discussing a few key ideas that you can do to help make sure that you're getting the most out of your sleep and getting the most out of that melatonin production. Now, one of the interesting things, and I was talking to Marianne about this on the phone yesterday, most people don't realize this, but we're actually seasonal creatures. How many of you have heard of that before, that we're seasonal creatures? A few people? Okay. The way that the easiest way to describe this is that if you think in the animal kingdom, we're all part of nature. We're not apart from it. Only in the last 150 years since the advent of the light bulb and electricity that we've actually been able to harness light, we've been able to push back weather, we've been able to turn night into day. And what ends up happening is that in the summertime, the easiest way to describe this is that we have a certain function in the summertime, and what we're wired to do is we're wired to eat. That's pretty cool, I like that part already. We're wired to eat, we're wired to get out and stay up late as late as possible, and lastly, we're wired to mate. So pretty much outside of eating, and sleeping, everything else is just time filler. So what ends up happening is in the summertime, because we're designed to do that, there's a certain set of hormones that fire off. How many of you find yourself craving margaritas, beer, anything sugary in the summertime? You ever heard of summer love, summer flings? The reason why that is because of melatonin is actually responsible for sex drive. So in the summertime when there's ample light until 11 o'clock at night and then it comes up at 5 a.m. with very short nights, we're wired to stay outside as long as possible, collect as much food so we can get fat for winter and then mate before winter comes. So if we move on to winter time now, what ends up happening is that there's a switch that happens in about September, a chemical hormonal switch that actually shuts off our hunger hormones so that we're not craving food all the time. It also shuts all of our organs down so that way we go into a more hibernative state. How many of you find yourself sleeping more or wanting to sleep more in the wintertime? It's not only that, but it's also Vancouver. I mean, like Marianne said, it's pretty easy to hibernate in this city. But exactly what I use the word hibernate is that we are wired after winter, or after the summers come through, we are wired to then essentially live off of the stores that we've created during the summer. And we're supposed to go into more of a hibernative mode. And it's interesting because of that right now, what happens in modern day life, because of all the electronics, because of the 24-hour day, we're constantly bathed in light, and what ends up happening is that we're constantly exposed to this light. We're up till 11 o'clock at night, we're not getting to bed until sometimes 2 in the morning, and it gets to a point where our internal mechanisms are just getting completely out of whack. Now the easiest way to think about this is that if you think of August, the longest days of summer in kind of July and August, what happens during that period that's the most stressful situation for any organism? Come on, somebody's got to know it. Any hunters in the room? That's Vancouver, I shouldn't have asked that question. Calgary would have gone away with it. The number one most stressful situation in any organism's life is mating season. Okay? And what ends up happening is that because we're being exposed to light all year round, what ends up happening is we live in perpetual August, which means our hunger hormones are raging, our sex hormones are raging, and all we can crave is sugar. So what ends up happening is that because we're not living in sync with the light and dark cycles of the planet, we are putting our body under an incredible amount of stress that's not giving ourselves enough downtime. We are wired to spend more time up in the summer and more downtime in the wintertime. So what ends up happening because of this is that it affects our food choices. How many of you, when you're up at 11 o'clock at night, are craving, I don't know, broccoli? No? What are we craving? Say it? Salt? Sugar? Oh yeah, sugar. Say it again? Yeah, hash browns? Yeah, exactly. So what we're craving is sugary foods. So what ends up happening as well is that because especially with anyone who's living with HIV, I understand the importance of a proper diet, and I understand the importance of getting proper food in your system. Now, the interesting part is that this is a very strong battle that you're fighting against. You're fighting against primal instinct, which means that if you're not sleeping and you're not getting to sleep at appropriate times, what's going to happen is that your body is going to be constantly craving sugar. You're not going to be getting the right foods in your system, and as a result, your body's not going to be functioning at its best. Does everybody get what I'm saying? Okay. So what we need to do is we need to start getting back into that natural rhythm and start moving towards getting to bed at an early hour, getting away from exposure to light late at night, and also getting to a point where we can start slowing ourselves down. And the trouble is that right now we live in a society that highly undervalues sleep. and highly undervalues downtime. How many of you heard sleep is for the weak? Am I the only one? You can sleep when you're dead. Yeah, there we go, kind of favorite. That's the kind of attitude that society has towards sleep at this point. And a lot of people have come to believe, or have had friends, family lead them to believe that people who sleep a lot are lazy. Your body needs sleep. I cannot stress this enough. One of the things you really need to do is to start making sleep a priority. And I know for some people, they just go, I mean, what? It's hard. I've got friends calling me up at 10 o'clock at night. Hey, do you want to go out? I've got a different meeting every evening. What it comes down to is priority. And I can promise you this: when it comes down to human priority, people are awesome at it. They will make sure that whatever's a priority gets the attention it deserves. How many people I've talked to have said, "Oh yeah, I know I can't be bothered," but then when you find something that they really want or really want to put their effort into, they will make it a priority. And I mean, some of you are going to go, you know what, the sleep, it's something I don't mind. I'm doing okay right now. I don't want to change what I'm doing. Learning how to sleep becomes behavioral modification. And when it comes down to modification, it takes time. This is not something, and like Marianne mentioned, with all these prescription medications, to give you an idea, there was 5.1 billion prescriptions for sleep medication filled in Canada last year. 5.1 million, not billion, 5.1 million. Wow. There was actually Starbucks, I mentioned this in a video I just recently did. Starbucks had a record year with $17 billion in net revenue. Okay, an energy drink, I know that Marianne mentioned it with Red Bull. Oh, I think I helped their stock go up over the years, I'll tell you that. And Red Bull actually sold for about 4 or 5 billion cans last year. So what it comes down to is that there's a lot of, the sleep is behavior modification. It can't be fixed by just popping pills and hoping that the problem's going to go away. And one of the things that most people aren't aware of, and I know that Marianne mentioned with melatonin, is it's a very safe short-term solution. I like how she put it, short-term. But I know people who depend on melatonin. Most people don't realize that if you take it long-term, it'll actually down-regulate your body's own production of melatonin. And to make it worse, it'll actually shrink the pineal gland. What's that? The pineal gland. Not steroids, melatonin. So what we're getting you to realize is that when you start taking these steps to improve your sleep, things are going to start to get better. Don't expect it to improve, no pun intended, overnight. It's going to take daily effort to make sure that you're improving those habits. Now, the big one that I wanted to talk about today is going over and understanding 4 of the major causes of modern day insomnia, so to speak. And one of the reasons why we're starting to experience it now is because of the plethora of electronics. How many of you own a computer? How many of you own an iPad? Cell phone? Smartphone? Tablet computer? Yeah, I'm seeing multiple owners going up with their hands. One of the main reasons why we're struggling with our sleep right now, and it's an area that most people don't realize is happening, is that when you're sitting in front of any sort of electronics device with any electric screen, television, computer, iPad, anything that I mentioned there, that device is emitting a blue light. It's a frequency of light that actually signals to your brain that it's daytime when it's not. So what that means is that if you're sitting on your laptop at 11 o'clock at night and that light's hitting your eyes, which it will be unless you're sitting there doing it with your eyes closed, then what's going to happen is that it's going to trick your brain into thinking it's what time of year. When would it be light? When would it be light till 11 o'clock at night? Summer. So guess what happens? You're up at 11 o'clock at night now. Your body thinks it's summer. It's going to start doing what? It's going to start mating. No, what it's actually going to do is it's going to get you to the point where, because you're up at that time of night, a different set of hormones starts firing off, and what ends up happening is that you're not getting the sleep that you need, and as a result, your body gets out of sync and out of whack. And that's the one thing that most people don't realize is electronics. Electrical interference is the number one reason why people struggle with their sleep. Okay? The second thing is as well is that exposure to light after 9 o'clock at night, we need to avoid that. And the reason why is because anytime after 9 o'clock at night, when you're getting that light, it could be from lamps, it could be from anything really, lights, all sorts of different lights. We need to remove that from our presence, I guess, the easiest way to describe it. So one of the ways that I explain to people is that if you want to do this, dim the lights. Bring the lights down, get yourself to a point where it's just, I always tell people, think romantic. By 9 o'clock at night, all my electronics are shut off. And trust me, I'll tell you what, this was hard because I used to be a gamer in my younger years. I was up till 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning playing video games because I couldn't go to sleep. Why? Because I was getting smacked in the face with blue light and I couldn't figure out why I couldn't go to sleep. I'm sure some of you in this room have been up till 2 in the morning watching, kittens on YouTube or some other, video like that. That light coming off the screen is actually provides a little bit of a hypnotic state, meaning that it's got kind of the hum of the screen and also the light coming at you. It actually keeps you awake. So the first thing you need to do is turn off all your electronics after 9 p.m. because what we want to be doing is working towards a 10 o'clock bedtime. A 10 o'clock bedtime. So one of the things that most people don't realize, and I see this a lot, is that people are on the go. They get home, they might have kids, they throw something on the stove, they have dinner. It's a constant, I guess, struggle to get things done. But what ends up happening is that it takes usually about an hour for your body to kind of quiet down. And like Marianne said, is you want to get yourself into a proper bedtime routine. Most people are on the go all the way up until bedtime. They throw themselves in bed and they go, why can't I sleep? Because your body needs time to get to that point where it actually can start relaxing and start winding down. And that's why at 9 o'clock at night, in our what was it called? What was inside the circadian rhythm? At 9 o'clock, that's when the melatonin production naturally starts. But for most people, they're still in front of the computer checking emails, they're on their iPhone, they're doing everything possible that's going to prevent them from going to sleep. So as soon as you remove that blue light interference, it will allow the production of melatonin to naturally occur at the time it should be starting. And this is getting back in sync with the planet. When you're out of sync with the planet, there's all sorts of consequences. Anxiety, depression, obesity, heart disease, erectile dysfunction. You can get to heart disease, you can get to high cholesterol. All of these are byproducts of being out of sync with the planet. And if you look at a lot of the medications that have side effects that affect sleep, what do you notice? They're heart disease, obesity, erectile dysfunction, diabetes, all these other weird and wonderful illnesses. So if we can get ourselves to a point where we're getting back into the natural rhythm or the natural cycle of things, your body is going to do what it does best and reward you for rewarding it. And I can promise you is that if you do that, your body will thank you. See, the interesting part is that your body only has 2 ways of letting you know that something's wrong. Anybody know what they are? Say it. Pain and getting sick. That's kind of going along the same lines. Anyone else? Say again? Cannot sleep. Okay, we'll go along those lines. It's pain and fatigue. Your body can't speak to you. It doesn't have words. All it can let you know is something's wrong by pain or fatigue. So if you're not able to sleep and you're tired all the time, your body is telling you, look, you need to start, what is the problem? Why are we not sleeping? Why are we tired all the time? Instead of just masking it with all these medications that are out there and trying to just pretend the problem doesn't exist, ask yourself, why is my body telling me this? And then start looking at ways to rectify the situation. And then lastly is sleeping in total darkness. Like we mentioned with melatonin earlier, remember we talked about the pineal gland and how that gland produces melatonin? We need to concentrate on sleeping in complete darkness. And when I say complete darkness, the reason I drew that picture of the bat is because bats are champion sleepers. They sleep 16 hours a day. Where do they sleep? In a cave, okay? 3 qualities of a cave. Dark, cold. You guys are good at this. Cold, dark, and quiet. So if you want to become a champion sleeper, think like a bat. That's the easiest way I can say it. So if you're getting yourself in your bedroom and you're making sure that your room is completely dark, you can do this through the use of blackout blinds. You can do this through darkening shades, or you can also do a sleep mask. At the end of the day, it can be any means necessary, but make sure there is no light coming in your room, no ambient light. People go, okay, check, I got that. Guess what? Any electronics that are in your room, anything that has a display screen, anything that has a blinky light, do whatever you can to either A, cover up the light, tape over it, remove it altogether, or just simply unplug it, one of those 3. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to remove any of those external influences or any of those external stimuli, I guess, from your bedroom environment, which actually, believe it or not, you can actually, that pineal gland can pick up that presence of light through your closed eyelids. Something that most people don't know about that is that your body is actually covered with photosensitive cells, and they actually did a study at Cornell University where they put somebody inside a completely dark room, covered them in thick, heavy bed sheets, just using a little LED light like you find on your iPhone. They put it behind the person's knee, right at the back here. And that was enough light to actually disrupt their melatonin production. A little tiny LED light. Your body is not as designed to be exposed to light after dark, so do whatever you can to make sure that you're sleeping in 100% darkness. So what I'm actually going to do, I'm going to hand out, I've got a couple sheets that I want to hand out. We've also, if anyone has any questions about anything that I've spoken about, any questions? Go.
In the nights that I have trouble sleeping, and my eyes are open, and I look at the clock, and it's 11, and my eyes remain open, and then it's 1 o'clock, and it's 3 o'clock, and I seem to be eyes open and aware, but I seem to be going through this period of almost a hypnotic half sleep, with my eyes open. And is that common? Is there an explanation of that? Because I seem like I'm in bed all night,
Right.
my eyes open, but I can feel myself almost being in this half sleep state.
Right.
Is that?
One of the first things that, and this was my experience as well because I've been down that road, one of the things that actually came about for me was that there's, I think they call it sleep hygiene. It's the actions you take during the day that affect your sleep. And it starts from the time you get up in the morning. And usually if there's some sort of situation like that where you're not able to get to sleep, you're staring at the ceiling, there's usually some sort of stimulant at some point during the day that most of the people aren't aware of that's actually causing that. And when I say stimulant, it can be anything from coffee, it can be nicotine. There's all sorts of hidden stimulants that people aren't aware of. But also as well is that it's also something that your body, you don't realize that it carries on. And the reason I say this is, do you drink coffee by any chance? Okay. I'm going to quickly go over this. It takes 15 seconds. Coffee has a half-life of 5 hours. It takes 5 hours for half the amount of coffee to clear your system. You only need about 12.5 milligrams to disrupt your sleep, which means if you take a Venti Starbucks coffee, which is 400 milligrams, 5 hours later, there's 200. 5 hours later, 10 hours later, there's 100. 15 hours later, there's 50. 20 hours later, there's 25. 25 hours later, it's cleared your system enough that you can get to sleep. Most people don't realize that coffee will actually get to a point where you're drinking it in such quantities that it never leaves your system. Because by the time the last bit's tailing off, the new bit's tailing on. So if you're finding that you're not able to get to sleep late at night and you're staring at the ceiling, the first thing I did, and I wasn't aware of, was to actually start going through and evaluating where am I getting my stimulants from throughout the day. Start reevaluating that, finding out what's going on, and start working on minimizing that as much as possible. Okay, thanks for the great question. Go ahead.
If you're asleep and there's noise,
Yes.
is melatonin still produced? And also, if you're intoxicated when you're sleeping, is melatonin still produced?
What you'll find is that yes, melatonin will be produced when there is noise. Melatonin is strictly dependent on light. However, what's going to happen is that when you're dealing with noise, any sort of ambient noise can actually wake you up. It's enough to actually disrupt your sleep and actually wake you up. So one of the suggestions that I have for this is that a lot of the times it's familiar noises that will wake you up. Somebody slamming a door, or whatever it happens to be, a cat or a dog or anything like that. So you've got a couple of different options. One, you can actually get yourself sorted out with some sort of, I call it gray noise machine, something that will actually counteract or cancel out that ambient noise coming from outside. It could be something as simple as an air purifier. You get these cool little water fountain trickler things that sit on your desk or sit on your bedside table and make a nice refreshing babbling brook noise. You can always get earplugs. I know some people are such light sleepers, and I know somebody that used to live under a flight path of an international airport. They said, "What can I do? I can't get to sleep at night." I said, "Move." And I wish I was kidding, but there's times when you have to completely remove yourself from that situation. And part of modern day life is that back 100 years ago, we didn't have jumbo jets flying over your house. So what you need to do is take the necessary steps to make sure that you're eliminating as much noise as possible so that you can then stay asleep. So another great one.